we were doing the mitzvah of Tzedaka. We take up part of it from the beginning. Mitzvah Kuf Sadi Hey. The mitzvah of Tzedaka, and part of it.
We should just go for a walk.
Chazik hachaloshim ulahachiv aleim, to give them a breather to the vehzakta boy, to mechazik them, and that. Ukvar bo atzivu b'mitzvah zu b'milas mischalfos, Oma pasorech tiftach es yotcholoi. We Oma vehzakta boy gave a soish b'chayimoch no b'chayichicha imoch. V'akavono, or the mator of all these lashonos, kulam achas v'hu she'na'azo inyonoi u'nechaz came de sipukom. It means de machzor sheyechsaloi, which is the mator of the mitzvah. We pointed out that in the reading, where Kapach translates it, the Ibetibu should naze in Yodom the Chaski de Sipukom, but Kapach says should the Chalkil oni shebonu betomachnu de machsoire. So shebonu, it's clear over here that the Rambam is of the opinion that the mitzvah Tzedaka is only Tanei Yisrael, as he says in Mishnah Torah. So we had the problem that the Rambam quotes the posik of Vechzaktabo Ger V'Soshev Chayimoch, and we said maybe Ger V'Soshev doesn't mean a Ger Toshav, as it by Avrom Avinu, but we pointed out the Rambam's Chiyah Matana is very clear that he quotes Ger V'Soshev Chayimoch is referring to Ger Toshav, and that's the mitzvah Lachiyosei. The Ram quotes this pasuk also Mishnah Torah, exactly like this. So, and the Ram in Mishnah Torah is very clear that the mitzvah is only by Yisrael. So I think that the best to do is to say that he's really referring to Veherzakta boy, and he's referring to the beginning of the pasuk, that if we talk about Yisrael, there is moch in Verzakta boy. Why he quotes the end of the pasuk is very odd, unless it's just a reference, a remez to the fact that there is also lachiyosei, but it's not the tzivur of the mitzvah. The tzivur for the mitzvah is b'soich tiftach, V'echzakta boy, v'chayachicha imoch, which is very, very interesting, because v'chayachicha imoch is also lachiyosei. So mayu mehai. So the answer is that lachiyosei is actually part of the mitzvah. Okay, but lachiyosei of Yisrael. And that's all that we learn after the pasuk. We'll see about this. We'll go through the Reis mitzvah later. We just get the foundations down. So, however, that the lachiyosef ger toshav is really not part of the mitzvah, and the Rambam mentions a mitzvah of tzedakah together with v'chayachicha imoch in Uchus Matnas Aniyim, but there's no mention of lachiyosei Matnas Aniyim. because Matnas Aniyim is about the mitzvah of Tzedaka. That makes things very strange. Because a priori, if you say the l'chayosei of a ger toshav is not part of tzedakah, then it should be a separate mitzvah. And the emes is that's the Ramban's opinion. So if that's the approach, what does the Ram do? See it. So Matnas Aniyim, first of all, he does quote the inyan of Lachiyosei by Yisrael in Hilchos Matnas Aniyim, and L'chayra v'chiyomuch or chicho umoto yodoi imoy v'chzakta boy. That's the mitzvah of tzedakah. And Lachiyosei is not for the second half of the passage. I'm quoting both half is a problem, as we pointed out. And it's in Zechia Matona, Loshen Perigimel Ochiyad Aleph, Aval Ger Toshe, Baby Bechira, Baby Nesina. You're allowed to give a Matnas Chinu, B'nei Shatam Mitzvah Lachiyosei. Shenema Ger V'Soshe B'chayimoch. So he learns Ger V'Soshe B'chayimoch is a tzivui. He says, Sha'ato mitzvah lachiyosei. So is it tzivui? There should be a separate mitzvah. We have to understand this. B'chai chichi imoch is poshit that it's lachiyosei by Yisrael. And there are many lies to this. The Gemara Nedorim, the Mishnah Dorim in Perek Tes, Mishnah Dalet, Ve'omer Meir, Poisel Lo Min HaKosuv, Shebatera, V'yomer Lo Yivo Yisi Yodeya, She'atoiva Al Lo Yisikom Lo Yisito, V'al Lo Yisis Zechil Vecho, V'after Lech Chamoicho, V'chai Chichi Imoch. Shema, so you see, this Dacha, and Yina V'chai Chichi Imoch. What is it? The Sefer also quotes this by marrying a woman who you don't really know see Shen or Genislo, who you really shouldn't marry. So this all is going back to the Gemara in Bava Metzia and Sarah Beis Manal, Vache Bava Mekiva, V'limed V'chayei Chichimo, Chayei Chakoidmen, L'chayei Chavacha. But he agreed to Beptir that we learn out V'chayei Chicho that is a mitzvah from Matzolah. But Metzia Peches Man Aleph is even more foolish. Peches Man Beis, I mean. Uma Odem She'at Mitzvah Chasimosei, At Mitzvah Lachiyosei. Sure, She'at Mitzvah Chasimosei. Eino Din She'at Mitzvah Lachiyosei. Omako V'chayo Chicha Imoch or Chicha V'lo Shor. So it's more foolish that Lachiyosei we learn V'chayo Chicha Imoch. And this is quoting as the third sivui of tzedakah. So the Ramban does the opposite. There's two. There's v'chzakta b'chayimoch, and that the Ramban learns a mitzvah of lachiyosei by Ger Toshav and Kol Shekeh by Yisrael, and he takes v'chayimoch and he learns that's the mitzvah of achzos ribis, based on a Gemara of Metzia, a mitzvah shochar rav, another mitzvah shochar rav. He based on a Gemara of Metzia on which he quotes here in it's Samach Aleph on the base. Hom of Nachman of Yitzchak, my time with Abelazar, You should return the ribis in order she should live. So, a priori, it's poshut what they're disagreeing about. The Ram says that's not pshuta shomikah. V'chayechichi imoch is lachiyosai. Ahadale keichel and neche is referring to ribis is a drasha because ribis happens to be mentioned b'samuch. Okay, and that's the machlikis, the shitosam in Sherish Beis that the Ram says you only count pshuta shomikah medina mitzvahs. The Ramban says that the drasha is also pshat, but it's a pshat pnimi chitzoni. So there's no problem in counting a mitzvah based on v'chai chichi imoch lahadalei v'hod v'neche. And that's what he says in mitzvah Yud Zayin. Shenitztava lahachzer ribis shelokachtem me'achinu v'chulei v'hi gam ke mitzvah sei v'omer yisala al tikcha me'itoy neshech v'sabes v'reisem elokecho v'chai chicho imoch v'doshu by ahadalei teleche imoch. So the pshuto shomiko by itself is certainly to be matzalim, but in context, the Ramban says Chazal Doirish that there's a chiyuv achzoros ribis. In fact, even the Bahag l'chayra is learning v'chayachicha imoch is a separate mitzvah because the Bahag has, besides the mitzvah Tzedaka, he has a mitzvah in Kum Vasei Memtes Hachiyas Ach. So he's referring to chayachicha imoch. Let's do one more thing before we get onto this more important this Indian which I brought up now and come to conclusions about it. There is another pasuk for tzedakah in the Gemara, and the Gemara learns out tzedakah for Nosem Titei, and l'chayra the Gemara is incontrovertible. Because the Gemara in Shavuos on Chaf Aleph on Aleph, ma etain ilay mitzvah la'oni mushpa v'oimed b'har Sinai mushpa v'oimed Sinai is because there was a Shavuot krisis bris on all Taryag mitzvahs. So that's the mushpa v'oimed Sinai is. And where is the mushpa v'oimed Sinai on tzedakah la'oni? Shenema nosain titein lo. So Nosen Titanloi is certainly mitzvah tzedakah. And that's the pashas of the Talmud. Here it's the Mefurish. The pashas of the Mitzvah, they call this Nosen Titan a matona. Nosen Titan, Ainli Ella, matona meruba, matona muetis minayin, Talmudoi Nosen Titan b'komokon. So you're giving a matona. Where's the mitzvah giving matana? The we're talking about tzedakah. However, the Ram does an amazing thing. The Ram quotes Nosen Titein for something else legamri. The Ram quotes Nosen Titein in Hilchos Shmita v'Yovel, Perek Tes Halacha Lamed. Me. Shenimna milahalvo says chaveru koydem hashmita. Shmita is coming, and he's afraid to give him a loan because he's going to lose everything. Shema yisache achoiv sheloi v'yishamet oval v'leisa aseh shenema hishoma locho v'chule v'hari hoisef hakosu lahavir. You should give the loan. Shenema nosein titein loy. Val yera levovcho besit choloi. The Pasha Shulchan in Simon Chav Tes, Sivkot and Kuf Yud Zayin, says the Pshuto Shel Mikra is referring to Alvo Bizman HaShmita. And the Rambam in Minyan HaMitzvos, who counts mitzvah according to Pshuto Shel Mikra, so he calls Lasan Tite as part of the mitzvah of Halvo Leoni. Even if you accept this idea that Pshuto Shel Mikra is referring to Halvo, you have a problem. Because the Gemara says, from this pasuk is Mushmalim Ba'al Sinai. So if it's not Pshuto Shel Mikra, l'chol ha'pochas shvi pirush makubal. Okay. So, because the most Mushmalim Ba'al Sinai, so it's a nishbal kaim is a mitzvahs, correct? I don't think you have a. So I'm just wondering. See, when the Pshuto Shel Mikra and the Pirush Makubal are each other, we had a case in Mitzvah Chof where the Pshuto Mitzvah Say Chof with the Pshuto Shel Mikra of Mizbach Adomo. Taseli, the Ram says it's referring to bombers. It's a mitzvah l'shah. So he says, the Pirush Makubal, that Mizbar Adomo, it should be Makubal l'kalka, and that's part of the mitzvah of Mizbach Avonim Taseli, which is part of the mitzvah of Binyan HaMikdash. The question is, what happens when a Pirush Makubal and the Pshuto Shel Mikra are pointing in two different directions? So I would have said, the Gemara seems to say, you go after the Pirush Makubal. But the Ram seems to say, I don't know, maybe you just can't count it twice. I can understand that. But how do you count it? And the Ram's quoting it for Halvo, which is a very interesting thing. Not sure what to do about this, but the Ram quoting it in Shemitah V'Yovel is very clear what his opinion is. And the Gemara saying Mushma Ba'al Sinai is also very clear what it's saying. Also, I pointed out last week, let's get back to this issue of Zakta B'chai Imoch. Minchas is an amazing thing. He says, since we're quoting the pasuk, B'chai Imoch, give us Zakt, give us Chai Imoch, that the mitzvah Tzedaka is to a get Toshav also. Which is amazing. He didn't have kapach, he didn't have the Arabic kapach, okay. But the Ram Mishnah, I guess he also had a different edition because the most editions we have were censored, but the mitzvah in Perek Zayin Alocha Aleph says Ani Yisrael. And he goes, in fact, to say there's a difference between the Aseh and the Lois Aseh. The Aseh is by Ger Toshav, and the Lois Aseh is only by Yisrael. Not only the Ram seems to say the mitzvah stock is by Yisrael, we have Sadi Goin also. I think we mentioned that last week, that he quotes the Lois Aseh, and it really is also the Aseh, because the Aseh and Lois Aseh, according to Abchai, Sadi Goin are the same. And he denies Shishi, so that I say at least it's the same, it's all counted as one. But it's only the same because it's both referring to Yisrael. interesting, and this is beginning of the discussion. Is also a kiyum tzedaka. Besides being an inyan of lach yoseh. I'll explain to you what I mean. Because he says in Perek Yud of Hilchos Matnas Aniyim Halacha Zayin, he says like this: Shmona Mailos yesh b'tzedaka, Zula Maila Mizu, Zola Maila Mizoi, Maila Gedola she'ei la Maila Mimeno, Ze Hamachzik Biyad Yisrael. Shemoch Yisrael who's about to fall. V'noisei lo matona oy halvo oise imoy shutfus oy mamsi lo malocha kei lechazik es yodoy ad sheloi yitztarich lebriois lishol v'al ze nema v'echzakta boy ger v'soisha b'chai imoch kloima hachzik boy ad shelo yipo v'yitztarich. However, if you notice, you look at Piyuk Yud Halacha Zayin again, he says, Ma'ila Gedola she'ein l'mayla mimenu ze hamachzik biyad Yisrael. Shemoch, he's only talking about Yisrael. So there he's quoting Vechzakta boy. There's also a kiyum of Chayachicha Imoch. But if the halvor is to prevent him to be machzik him, sometimes you give a halvor because the person needs it. Okay? He's an oni. He needs the halvor. He's not about to fall apart, but it will give a new dimension to his life, makes things easier. Okay? I'm not sure if that's tzedaka because his lashon is l'mayli shei mayli menu ze hamachzik biyad Yisrael v'noisel matona avo oisel shutfus o mamsil mlocha kedei lechazik es yodoi ad shelo yitztarech lebrius v'yisrael. He's holding, he's close to the point of complete bankruptcy, of falling apart, and you're helping him not to get to that point. That is the kiyum tzedaka. That's vechzakta boy. Okay. Now, so yeah. The Rambam Mishnah Torah also quotes these psukim Perek Zayin Halacha Aleph Mitzvas say litein tzedaka laniyim shnei pesuach tiftach es yotcho loy v'nema v'chzakta boy ger v'soishem v'chayechicha imoch v'nema v'chayechicha imoch. Now, now, it's Boro when the Rambam means, this is where I start, and this is the important point. You see, for what we had before, we only saw Vechzakta. Vechzakta is a kiyum of Yisrael, to give him before he's about to fall. But where is the kiyum of Chayachicha Imoch of Tzedaka? So here, goes like this. In Perek Ches of Hilchos Matnas Aniyim Alocha Yud, Pidyon Shvuyim koidem lepanosas aniyim ulechasoison. Ve'ein locho mitzvah gedoyle kepidyon Shvuyim she'ashevi hariyubachal hareivim v'atzmei v'arumim v'oimei b'sakonis nefoshes v'amalim einov mipidyonoy harizoi ve'al loisamitz es levavcho v'loisikboitz es yodcho v'loisaman adam reacho v'al lo yoradu b'forach leinecho ubitul mitzvas posoich tiftach es yodcho loi u'mitzvas v'chayachicha imoch. So you see, in Pidyon Shvuyim, there's a kiyum tzedaka. And that's v'chayachicha imoch. And that's why it's another pasuk for tzedaka, according to the Rambam. So you'll ask me, if it's another pasuk for tzedaka, how does the Rambam say when he counts the number of mitzvahs over? In Perek Ches Halacha Yud, he counts as two. Pesach tifres yotcha loy and v'chayachicha imoch. How is that possible? Is it one mitzvah or two mitzvahs? The Ramban says it's two, and the Rambam counts it as one. But the Rambam says you're over on two things. So here, I think this is not a problem at all. If you recall, the Rambam Shiur Tishi takes care of this problem. Not this problem specifically, but the concept. He says like this: V'da ki ato v'afilu timsa loshen hachachomim ki v'chulei mi sheyevatel dova ploni over kach v'kach aseh. It's mevatel, like the Rambam saying over here. He's over on 5, 4, 3 assays. Lo yischayev mizeh. This doesn't obligate one. It doesn't predicate one. Shetimne halav mahem kulam kol echad biyichud v'lei kol asay biyichud. The fact that you overcome asay does not mean that the separate mitzvah minyan mitzvahs. But what does it mean? Ki yo inyan echad v'ein boy kefer. If it's an inyan echad, so it's nichbal to fechizuk. But it's not a separate mitzvah. V'omnam omru oiva kach v'kach aseh or kach v'kach lavin ba'avu ha'kefer hatzivui. Oy azhora b'mitzvah hahi ki oma ki hu ova al azhoros rabbis or al tzivuyim rabbim. He violates many positive commandments, many positive tzivuyim, but they're not different tzivuyim. They're not different mitzvahs. V'raya alma kol ma she'omalnu omrom by tzitzis kol she'ein loy tzitzis bebigdoi oy b'chamisha aseh ba'avur shenichba boy loshen tzivuy chamisha poimim echav v'osalem tzitzis she'ein losal tzitz sakalov. And the Ram counts it as always one mitzvah. And he does the same thing by other mitzvahs he talks about, by tefillin, by bikas kohanim. But this is what's going on over here. They're separate tzivuyim, and for kefal for chizuk, but it's only one mitzvah minyan mitzvahs, because there's an element of tzedaka in lachayos. Now we're ready to start to begin to understand that's L'chayese by Yisrael. And that's one of the tzivuim for the mitzvah. But what about L'chayese for Ger Toshav? Where do we put it? How do we organize this? Is it a separate mitzvah? Or it's not a separate mitzvah. The Ramban says it's a separate mitzvah. Biskarov, in his Pirush al HaTorah, at the end of Re'eh, says L'chayre Ger Toshav, according to the Rambam, is Me'inyan Tzedaka. Okay. But how could that be? The mitzvah tzedaka is Yisrael B'davka, and L'chayese by Yisrael is certainly part of the mitzvah. But what happens to a Ger Toshav, and how does that play itself out? In fact, so we have like we're almost at a stalemate. On one hand, it's clear that L'chayese by Ger Toshav is not a separate mitzvah, it's Me'inyan Tzedaka. But l'chayre, there's no kiyum tzedaka in L'chayese of a Ger Toshav. See, the Ramban, I think, went a step further. Because the Ramban Nasogis and Shich Hasei Tazayin, when he's explaining, he counts the separate mitzvah lachiyas, Shendisavino lahachiyas Ger Toshav, lahatziloi meirosoi, v'omroi, Yis'ale b'chiyomoch echicho moto yodoi, imoch v'echzakta boi gervesosh v'chayimoch v'chule. Listen to what he says. V'horav kol al oiso imat tzedaka b'mitzvah kuf tzadi hey. Mi posuk posoech tiftach es yodcha. So I don't get it. Ve'im shtayim mitzvos be'emes. V'rav kol oiso imat tzedaka mitzvah kuf tzadi hey. Mi posik posoech tiftach. I don't get what he means. He put the tiftach. I think he's learning ve'echzakta boy ger v'toshav, that the Ram's quoting ger v'toshav v'chayimoch is part of the mitzvah. I don't know what he means by Pesach, but he says that the Ram counts it in the mitzvah. Kuf Sadi Hey. So l'chayra a priori, there are two approaches here. You could say that it's not the Indian of tzedaka mamish. There's no kiyum tzedaka in Ger Toshav, in L'chayese, and that's where Biskarov is working, because Biskarov has the Ram in front of him, Mishnah Torah in Perek Zayin, Halacha Aleph, in Matnas Taniyim, with the Girsa, which is Norlikis Vayad. There might have been censored versions of it, but the mitzvah is to give tzedakah Tani Yisrael. So he says Ger Toshav cannot be kiyum tzedakah. And the Ram clearly says, V'echzakta boy ger v'soshav is referred to Ger Toshav Matnas Taniyim. So he bases the Ram doesn't count as separate mitzvahs me'inyan tzedakah. The Ramban seems to say that there's a mitzvah tzedakah by L'chayese, by Ger Toshav, which l'chayra doesn't fit in with the Ram is always in Hilchos Matnas Taniyim by Yisrael. Now, next step. I think to support this approach and to understand what we're saying over here, where does the Rambam quote the dinim of L'chayese by Yisrael, and where does he quote the dinim of L'chayese by Ger Toshav? So the dinim of L'chayese by Yisrael, we pointed out, then Hilchos Matnas Taniyim he talks about Pidyon Shvuyim. However, when it comes to the dinim alachies of Yisrael, love Toshav, there's no peculiar place where he counts it. It's basically sprayed mefuza or mefurad all over Mishnah Torah in different mentions and in different contexts, but he doesn't put it in any particular place at all. I'll read you some of the references. Hilchas Avodah Zarah, Perek Yud, Halacha Beis. V'ger Toshav, Hoyel v'atam mitzuva l'achiyei yisei, mirapin oisei b'chinam. Mitzuva l'achiyei yisei. Hilchas Shabbos, Perek Beis, Halacha Yud Beis. Avo miyaldin es beger Toshav, bas ger Toshav. Mipnei shono mitzuva l'achiyei yisei. Ve'ein mechal no le'es HaShabbos. There's a Yimalat Miyale the Ger Toshav. There's no Malacha in Leda. That's what he seems to say. Not getting involved whether it is or isn't. And he says that you're allowed to do it because of Halacha Yosei. Okay. Hilchas Shabbos. Hilchas Avodah Shabbos. Hilchas Chiyah Matana. Avol the Ger Toshav. Beim Bechira. Perek Gimel Halacha Yud Aleph. Beim Bechira. Beim Matana. Beim Nesina. Mipnei shata mitzuva l'achiyosei. Shnema ger v'soshe v'chayimoch. Hilchos Malachim, Perek Yud Halacha Yud Beis, v'chein yuli she nohagim im geri Toshav b'derech eretz u'gemilas chasodim ki Yisrael shari onu mitzuva l'achiyosei. He calls a different pasuk. Shnema lager asher b'shachecha titneno v'achol. Okay, but it's all over the place. L'achiyesa by Yisrael is in Hilchos Matnas Aniyim, Pidyon Shvuyim, and by Ger Toshav, it's all over the place. So if you call, I pointed out on many occasions that the Rambam's has organized halachas according to the Ika Mitzvah. And therefore the Ika Mitzvah of Simchas Yontif is in Hilchas Hagiga. He may mention dinim of Simchas Yontif in Hilchas Yontif, but that's not the Ika Mitzvah. The Ika Mitzvah of Tzedaka is to Yisrael. And all these three psukim refer to Israel. And he's referring to Umach, he's talking about Yisrael Umach. V'chzakta boy. However, L'achiyesa b'ger Toshav, it's not a separate inyan, but it's not the Ika Mitzvah, because the Ika Mitzvah is by Yisrael. So the Ram Dafka doesn't count it as a separate mitzvah. But on the other hand, it's not a separate inyan. So he counts it all over the place. It's not a separate mitzvah. Big chiddush. I would say with Madashach. Either it's here and it's a kefil and it's the Ika mitzvah, or it's a separate mitzvah. The Rambam has a new type of concept. Then on one hand, it's not a separate inyan because the inyan of L'achiyosei is the inyan of Tzedaka. But on the other hand, there's no Tzedaka by Ben Noach and by Ger Toshav. So the Ram says it's not the Ika Mitzvah and puts it all over the place. It's an amazing thing. The Ramban, what he suggests in the Ram, I don't know how to put it through, because the Lamaisa is there doesn't seem to be at all in the Rambam that there's a relationship between Ger Toshav and the Mitzvah Tzedaka. So this, I must say, is very odd, but I can't do any better, but this is what it is. Now, let me take you a few other things here. The Ram says at the end, Ubo HaKabbalah Shafilu Oni Amispanis Minestoka Chayev B'Mitzvah. So it means without a Pirish Makubal, and Oni is not Chayev and Stoka. It comes to Pirish Makubal, and Oni is Chayev and Stoka. What he's quoting the Gemara Gittin, the Gemara Basra, the Gemara Gittin, Omer Avasi, in Baba Basra, Li'olam al Yimno o Atzmoi, Odem Atzmo, Milose Shlishas HaShekel Bashona, Sheneva Amadnu, Oleinu Mitzvos, Loses Oleinu Shlishas HaShekel Bashona Avodas Beis Elokeinu. But there we don't know. We're talking about Tzedaka. We just know you shouldn't have less than that. We don't know this is Tzedaka. The Gemara Gittin Zayin Bey says, "V'nisicho Oma Mazutra Afilu Oni Amispanis Min Tzedaka Yase Tzedaka Lo Encha Oid Tony Rav Yosef Shuv Ein Marin Lo Simen Aniyus." So I would have said in the Gemara that it's a bracha, that not that he's chayiv, but if he does it, he won't be an oni. The Rebbeinu will bless him. However, I assume the Rama puts these two Gemaras together, and he learns that the chiyuv of Shlishas HaShekel is the Chiyuv Tzedaka, and that's what's going on in the Gemara Gittin. And the Shiltus also does the same thing. In Shilta, Kuf Mem Zayim, will be boy the Efshalei, if he has wherewithal, that he's Chayav L'Aseh Tzedaka, Afilu Onim Ispanis Min Tzedaka, Yaser and Tzedaka. Shenema, V'nisicho, Lo Yencha Oid, Omav Yosef Shuv Eimar Lo Simnei Aniyus. And this is the Rambam. It's in Perek Zayin. Excuse me. In Perek Zayin, I think Halacha Hey, if I'm not mistaken, the Ram is talking about various shiurim in Tzedaka. Uli olam lo yimna atzmo mishlish shekel bashona. B'chol anoisim pochos mizeh elokim mitzvah. Filo onim ispanis me'tzedaka chayiv litei tzedaka la'acher. So Ram has put these two Gemaras together and says that the Gemara in Baba Basra is coming to explain the Gemara in Gittin and is a chiyuv to give a certain amount of tzedaka a year, and that's anonymous panas min tzedaka. Here in Sefer Mitzvos, it's not clear you would have come to this conclusion because it says, "Oboa Kabbalah fi anonymous panas min tzedaka chayiv b'mitzvah." Kloima hatzdaka, im lemisha lamata mimenu, or ledoima loy. Vafilu b'dover mut. Two amazing chidushim over here. Someone who is at a higher economic standing, okay? For example, I don't know, we didn't discuss this, but the Rambam clearly says in this mitzvah, the mitzvah tzedaka is dei machsora sheyechsara. And he said it, if you remember, in Shorish Aleph, he talks about ma'b'sharumim, to feed re'evim. He says the mitzvah is dei machsora sheyechsara. Sus lilkoiv. Okay. So let's say I am a low economic status than Harry. Okay. Harry used to be a nobleman. He had a sus lilkoiv. I never had a sus lilkoiv. Okay. Harry's walking around asking for sus lilkoiv. So I want to give him tzedaka. Dei machsor sheyechsaloi. So the Chayil say there's no kiyum. Because the mitzvah tzedaka says, kloi mat tzedaka. Im lemi shelamata mimenu, or ledoimaloi. So I would assume ledoimaloi is similar economic status. You can evaluate the guy's need for sus lilkoiv and Evid Rotz Lefonov as my needs to put food on the table. So I'm not sure if there would be kiyum stock over there. But the amazing thing is, he says stocka is bedoimaloi, your equivalent, or less than you. Anything more, that's not stocka. Might be Gemilas Chesed, we'll see in Mitzvah, but it's not stock. But then he also says the dover mu'at. Okay. He doesn't say shlish hashekel. So here he can go in two ways. You could say that he's only working with the Gemara Gittin, and the Gemara Gittin doesn't mention a shiur, just says you have to give something. It says dover mu'at. In Mishnah Torah's mechadish, you put the Gemara Gittin together with the Gemara Basra, and you have that there's a shiur of shlish shekel. So there would be machlokes. Or you can say maybe he's not interested in dover mu'at because that is protei dinim. He doesn't have to mention it. So you have to ask yourself what exactly is happening here. Okay. Now let's just finish off the other inyan. Just 2 points. Point number one: the Ram is very clear that an oni and the shiltes, that an oni is chayiv, even though he's a soch panosa. He doesn't have panosa, he's chayiv in tzedaka. But a minimum shiur of shlisha shekel l'shana. Okay. So the Shach says that a person doesn't have what to live on is not chayiv in tzedaka. Shach in Yodei Simuvesh Mem Chesef Kot Nauf. Okay. Discussion, if you want to see the achlinish discussion in Der Chamuna, Matnas Ani in Perek Zayin Sibu Kot Lamed Beis, and see in Alochas and Kot Pei Dal. Just before we continue, there's another way of canning it. Shlish HaShekel is the shiur for the whole year. When an oni comes and it's Poishit Yad, you can give. The question is, maybe this oni is mechuyit to give him dover mu'at. But over the year, if he's taking out his pocket more than shlish shekel he's bought, so maybe it's a different thing going on. But with shlish shekel, he says lashana. It's not to any particularly the dover mu'at. The dover mu'at is to a peculiar oni. Shlish is for a year. And it's two different issues. So you can say there's a machlokes, first of all, which is the Rambam, Mishnah Torah, and Sefer HaMitzvos, whether the Gemara Gittin is anything to do with Kavitz Lahachzik Beis Hashem, is to do with Tzedaka. Okay? And Mishnah Torah is clear Tzedaka. And if you say he agrees, maybe he's talking about something else. Not only it's not support they dinim, but anytime he has to give a double mut when he sees an oni. But however, the total should not be more than the shlish shekel from over the year. Now, next. This same Rambam in Perik Zayin Halocha Hey and Matnas Aniyim says like this. Bo ha'oni v'shol de machzeroi. Harry's coming now and he wants the horse and the eved shulatz lefonav. Noisein loy kefi hasogas yoda. Derech agav, this whole idea of bedoima loy or pochas v'menu is not mentioned in Mishnah Torah. This, the only place of this discussion in Rambam is only in Sefer HaMitzvos, only over here. So he says like this. Yeah. Boho oni v'sholo de machzero v'ein yad hadoisein maseges. He doesn't have enough money to give him sus lilkod v'lov v'ever lo it's the fonov. Noisein lo kefi hasoges yoda. But even if he has hasoges yoda, there's a cap on hasoges yoda. The chiyuv of de machzero is kefi hasoges yoda with a cap. V'kama ad chamishis nechosov mitzvah min hamufcho v'echa me'asor b'nechosov b'nechosov is beinoni. Pochas mikan ayin ro u'le'olam l'gim na'atzim u'shlish sa'shekel b'shana. And that is the din of oni mispanis min hatzedaka. For noisim pochas mizel lokim mitzvah va'afilu oni mispanis min hatzedaka chayiv litein tzedaka la'acher. So then it's an amazing thing. He meets an oni, every time he sees an oni, he gets a little bit. But the total of the year doesn't add up to the shekel. It wasn't Mekayim and mitzvah. It's an amazing thing. It has to add up to shlish shekel. Okay, next. Now, just an aside to close up the mitzvah tzedaka. I'm confused. Once you say that lachayosei is me'id tzedaka, it's not a separate mitzvah, I would tell you the following. I would tell you not only lachayosei, but I would tell you, why not leket shikcha upeya and peret and oilelois? And why not Maisa Oni? Why not? So, when do you decide it's more than one mitzvah? So I could have told you that, we have to go back to the old discussion. Is the fact that it's a lavadita laseh, that itself is indicative, it's a separate mitzvah, and leket shikha, and leket peya, oilois, peret, all lavadita laseh. And Maisa only because the Seder Maislas, and therefore it can't be a mitzvah Tzedaka. And when do you decide because it has peculiar dinim and separate dinim becomes a separate mitzvah, which the Ram says in Kuf Yud Zayin? How do you put it all together? The truth is, the question is, when do you decide? How do you? It is very clear that the mitzvahs are in Yonei Atayah, but how do you decide what the Indian is? That's a big problem, look at it. Derech Agav, there's a word here in Kapach which I didn't catch. Okay. Oh, excuse me, sorry. No. That's the next mitzvah. We'll start that. Okay, good. Let's go. Okay. Let's just get started. I guess, of a minute or two, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 3 minutes, whatever it is. Next mitzvah, mitzvah shesh, b'tishim u'meya, hishizibono, lahanik eved ivru. Just want to say one thing before we start. The Rambam here, you can add to the discussion. The Rambam holds a Hanik Tanik, giving a matana to Eved Ivri, on the Shichur, when you shalchel lechovshi, is the kiyum, is an Indian of Tzedaka. And still, it's a separate mitzvah, but since the Indian Tzedaka, he puts it right over here after the mitzvah Tzedaka. And we'll see in Mitzvah Hashem. We'll start a little bit now. For example, the Shach in Choshen Mishpat Siman Pei Vav Sifkot and Gimel. That he says, Dov Yedua, the Hanoka who we did Stoka, who Kremash Mikra. Ubishas perek elo b'tzias the begedushin ubekama duchte. So befurish and shach that hanik tanik is stocker. The gedule truma in shanun aleph chelik aleph ois hey heure hakosu the das of lozer the zelo shaykh elo b'choiv gomo going alvo or yafilu b'schiris the alma she chelef malachta she torach imoy v'yesh olav chiyuv tashlu imom it's a chiyuv gomo v'loy b'teris chen v'chesed. Avo bahanoka she'eino ela b'derech hanino o motera. The afagaf the schia mikri ein motziin mizeh lebal chayiv. You're not motziin miyotah to the. You don't call the eved about chayiv that you mechuyev to him. The Mishnah Melech in Huchos Avodim Perek Gimel Loch Yedalid is mesupik about this, and he quotes Aran, which a Mitzvah Hashem we'll pick up and we'll see. Now spotted to pshita the apa noko yodn lechosev the legoa mitstoka ki komisapkali who are liba the rashba the sil mitstoka loy nachtin gabi anoka mahu the efshet anoka din chayv yeshlo it's a chiyuv to soche kayo achmona the see ki mishlis chasach the nachtin the chosev o dilma the doma mitstoka but doma tzor talmud. Mitzvah Hashem will pick this up next week.